Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Holmes. I'm the Executive Vice for the President's remarks. We also, just a few words of introduction before we see philosophy from Tbilisi State University. Elections in 2012. He was appointed the role of minister. The timing of today's event could not be. Also marks a decade since Russia invaded Georgia. It's also worth noting that 2018 marks the centenary of the establishment of the. Now, even with the Russian invasion and its.
Thank you for such a great introduction, which really shows and identifies where we are and what our goals are and where towards which direction we are moving. So let me try to sum up my experience and work that I've had during this several days, a very rewarding days which I spent in DC, and to tell you what were the basic messages and issues that we were discussing, since this is like close to the final meeting that I'm having during my visit. The things stand as it has already been described. Georgia has chosen its very clear message to the outside world, as well as to its society, that we are entitled to be member of the family of nations that we belong to, that historically we identified ourselves, and that in today's reality congregate in one or another form in EU and NATO. We have been persistent on our path, and we have been punished many times for our dedication to those goals, as well as to our passion to freedom and to the notion that it's up to us to determine where and in which alliances or in which direction we will develop our social environment, our political environment, as well as our geopolitical orientation. In this context, we have gone through several stages, the stages that I'll just very shortly touch upon. And these were the beginning of 90s, when something happened in Georgia, which later, in 2014, we labeled as the Green Man or the format of the hybrid war. At that point, Georgia was already occupied by Russia, though this was not an official occupation, which happened in 2008, and still we are wrestling with the outcomes of that occupation, where Russia not only occupied parts of Georgia, but also declared this as independent states. Now, our goal is to develop the country, develop the mainland, which is controlled by the central government and by Georgian authorities, and develop it very clearly in direction of EU and NATO, believing that at some point there will be a phase in Russia's history when there will be a possibility to negotiate the future of our bilateral relationships based on a rational assumption of what is really needed for the citizens of our countries. And I'm stressing this because it's not very often that you can talk with the Russian leaders assuming that they talk from the interests of their citizens. I mean, what those relationships would bring better good for the citizens they are representing at those negotiations and talks. We believe at some point this is the time to come. But until then, what we are seeing is more aggressive Russia. And there was a phase when it really started and sort of materialized in the Russian foreign policy, which was very bluntly presented by President Putin in 2007 in Munich, when he was talking that the unipolar world has finished and that he would retaliate. And then in 2008, we saw a direct occupation of Georgia by Russian military forces. And then in 2014, we saw annexation of Crimea and occupation of eastern Ukraine. So that period, starting from 7 till 17, I would call a policy when Russia was defining its relationships with its neighborhood through a term which is familiar to you, but which is a terrible term to hear. It is a term of privileged interest areas or privileged interest zones. To put it more bluntly, our backyard. That's what Russians were saying, and that's what they were trying the world to accept as a notion of their relationships with their neighbors and as a premises of any other relationships to Russia's neighbors, meaning that if there will be any kind of advance and partnership, the partnership would be stalled or punished. Now we are watching the new election campaign for the Russian president, which will be happening shortly, the day after tomorrow. And we see a new rhetorics, whether it's election campaign rhetorics or whether this is the new policy of Russian Federation, it will be seen in future. But basically what we are seeing is that the policy of the privileged interest areas has moved to a new policy which has been presented by Russian president basically through exposing videos of nuclear weapons and saying that the bipolar world is back, basically telling us that the new Cold War is starting. One of the issues that I was discussing here with my friends and colleagues on the both sides of the aisle, and I'm happy to see that U.S. is so much, United States politicians are so much congregated and united on Georgia's issues as well as on security issues, was to give an adequate response to what Russia has laid out, and also to appreciate the fact that what is laid out by Russian politicians is in very many cases what they really believe in and what they really think is what they talk, and this is how they act in future. So when we are looking at those challenges, we are hearing analysis that where Russia does not have enough economic power to launch a new Cold War, or Russia does not have enough military power to launch the new Cold War. And we as NATO are strengthening our borders so that even if they had, we would be protected. Now, all those assumptions are important, but let me give you another side of this case. Ones of you that remember the Cold War and the analysis of Cold War remember that the Cold War was not really fought through a nuclear confrontation. There were no ballistic missiles shot at each other from NATO and Warsaw Pact. But Cold War was in action. It was in action in form of proxy wars, which sacrificed millions of lives and were an arena for both of the unions, the Warsaw Pact and NATO, to present its ability and to present its power, as well as to sort of shape the world in the favorable format. So Cold War does not really measure up to the number of the missiles. It measures up to the political dedication of the leaders to one or another cause. And in this respect, the fact that Russia tries to, let's say, even imitate a form of the Cold War could be very much dangerous for the countries that could be viewed by Russia as a place where they could exercise and expose their dominance. So my point was, this is one point, and the second point is, if NATO shuts down, like I believe Russia will be building a more sort of Iron Curtain style fence around itself, If NATO does the same, if NATO does not confront this with embracing countries that have clearly exposed and presented their Western orientation and Western identity, then what we are doing, we are creating opportunities for Russian Federation to really expose its abilities in that areas. So to the aggression rhetorics that we are hearing, I believe we have to respond with a more open, inclusive format, and a format that will secure the countries that have clearly made the choice to Western civilization, the choice to freedom and choice to democracy, and not give opportunities to the Russian Federation to really punish them for this choice, as well as give them an opportunity to create an example for the others who are still thinking in which direction do they want to develop. Those were the challenging issues that I discussed with my friends and colleagues, and coming here to DC, it's really emotionally a gift for me because I don't have to convince anyone on the basic values and partnerships that we are exercising towards each other. It's clear that we have common goals, and it's a pleasure to be among friends. The only detail through which we have to go is to strategize how to do this. Let me tell you that it's also a very interesting time because it might be difficult to use the word interesting because it's tragic but important that we are now here today in a political process of responding to the attacks in Salisbury. Actually, I am here today also bringing the Georgian case of an Georgian patriot who was a peacekeeper in Iraq, who had never fired a bullet in Georgia, but was serving for our common goals in Iraq, who came back to Georgia, retired, and he was just living as a regular citizen, being basically killed on the occupied territories, and the corpses are not given back to Georgia and to his family. And this is the third week that we are going through this. And I say it's important to be here because I'm seeing the emotion of congregating around the allies. I've seen the response from DC to those issues. I've seen other countries like France supporting UK on this issue. I see that the acknowledgement of the fact that we are dealing with a problem is pushing more our friends and allies to stand up to those issues and be united. I call for more unification. We have to go out of our comfort zone and acknowledge the fact that if we don't make bold moves today, we are going to have challenges tomorrow. Do I find sort of understanding? Yeah, I very much do, and I let me tell you that this is on the both sides of the aisle. I feel that the moment is felt. I feel that some things and some issues have gone to its extremes, and the acknowledgement of the problem is there. And I feel that community of our allies is ready to craft new moves and policies to make the world a safer place. So it was quite a challenging time. It is interesting that this is happening on a very high level of friendship between our countries. So what precisely we were discussing at those meetings is how to unite all those tools that we have, supplement them with other tools, and do something that was always done from this capital to create a leadership for a peaceful process. And when we look back to the last 100 years history, basically, there has not been a case when a better and more stable future has not been sponsored by U.S. leadership. There has not been a case where there wouldn't be someone standing up here and saying, okay, we cannot proceed in the normal day-to-day manner, and we have to be more active, more outspoken, and more resilient on our beliefs and our values to really secure the better future. You know, there were political leaders who say, well, I hope it doesn't happen on my watch. You know, I mean, democracy has that comfort. You know, you are in office for several years and you can, but there were leaders like recent leaders, like Ronald Reagan, who made the difference. And exactly on his watch, the things have changed, and we are thankful for his leadership, because he changed the world. He changed literally the lives of millions of people who were living under totalitarian system. But even furthermore, he made US more safe. He made EU more safe. That created an opportunity to build a safer Europe. That created the biggest market in the world of 500 million people, which are living in prosperity, in secure, and with the hope for the better future. So what our argument was these days, we are at the moment of the next bold move, and we believe that the leadership should come from him. And I feel the sense that there is the feeling for that. And maybe this is a rare example where there is actually total bipartisan support for a further moves in security direction. I mean, you see that the discussions really between the different parts of the aisle are how should it be done. But the consensus that the move should be done is here. So I was really here to grasp the moment, to present Georgian issues and to say, well, friends have to stay united and the allies have to stay united. And I hope that's what will happen. And thank you.
You mentioned the importance of the U.S.-Georgia bilateral relationship. And it is thriving, it is growing, it's doing really well. But in your opinion, how can we elevate this relationship? How can we take it to the next stage and sort of consolidate everything that we have done up to this point and look towards the future?
Well, I believe where we are right now, and maybe where we are right now, is a much more favorable condition than all of us were challenged, let's say, some 30 or 40 years ago. We have an experience of successful combat, not combat, but successful overcome of the Cold War, and then so we have an ability to look at the examples and examples of success. And I mentioned Ronald Reagan, but I believe the first bold move was done by Truman when he was trying to deal with the rollback in Greece, and supporting an independent nation that could be challenged by outside or by inside by some kind of disturbing events. And he clearly said that we have to support Greece, and that's. I mean, there are other examples, but when I'm looking at all the great projects that we are doing, and it was I didn't want to lose the time to talk about that again, but I will say briefly, military. We have great cooperation and talking about the free trade opportunities. We have great political partnership. Let's compile it. That was my pitch let's compile it. Let's compile it into something that we would call a Georgia Support Act, an act that would look at the region and say, okay, here's the region, here is Georgia, it unites two seas, the Caspian and the Black Seas. Here on the Caspian, we have huge energy resources on both ends, on east and west of Caspian. Then there is a huge commodity market, which is Central Asia. Connection of those markets is happening basically through two routes: the Russian route, the northern route, and the Georgian route. Georgian route is really a strip of oxygen for bargaining in that cases. I mean, if you only have the Russian option, then you are very heavily loaded with the Russian content in trade. I mean, that's the fact. So looking at the region, saying, okay, this region, here is Georgia. Georgia is a clear supporter of the United States. It's a clear ally to West. There are challenges for this country. A rollback in this country would mean many, many things. Shutting down the eastern markets, strengthening the cooperation from south to north, from north to south. So it's such a decisive place. Why don't we court it? Why don't we secure that there are no rollback opportunities here, so that the rollback, which wouldn't be only a Georgian rollback, which, as I tried to explain, would be a real change of the mapping for the energy, for the commodity markets in the whole region. So let's craft it all into one act that would be adopted by the legislature, and that would secure and would unite all the tools, including trade, political, military, other tools, to secure that the Russians don't start thinking about what they want to do there. I believe what I said, that Russians will be trying to expose themselves and present their almighty abilities somewhere. So what do? We sort of stand a stronghold on the places which are very decisive, which have already decided on their orientation, and not create opportunities through ambiguities which could be presented on our policies. That was my call. I feel that I had the ears of the Senate and Congress, both of them.
Well, Georgia is very lucky of you, as you've already mentioned, Mr. President, in that you enjoy this vast bipartisan support. And there's also great support in the executive branch to bring that relationship very close, more closely together, as we saw recently with the sale of the Javelin missiles. I'm glad that you mentioned the non-security aspects of the U.S.-Georgia relationship. On the most basic level, I encourage interns here at Heritage to go to Georgia and speak English, or teach English. But on the more strategic level, getting support from the U.S. executive for big infrastructure projects like Southern Gas Corridor, the East-West links, the new port in Georgia. I think this sends a very strong message, too, that the U.S. is present in the region and wants to be involved. And we are encouraging a U.S.-Georgia free trade deal as well. So fingers crossed on all of that. Looking towards July at the NATO summit, what would be your expectations? What would be your hope for Georgia to achieve at the NATO summit?
Well, we are still in negotiations. Well, this is, as it was properly mentioned, this is a 10-year anniversary. This is the 16th year since we applied to NATO. This is the 10th year of anniversary of NATO committing to Georgia that it will become NATO member, and sadly a 10-year of anniversary of Russia's occupation of the regions of my country. What we are looking at, and actually at a 10th year of great performance of Georgia in context of NATO reforms and in context of NATO participation. We have all the really working tools on the ground which enhance our path to NATO. Now, what we are seeing is the format of a consensus in NATO, where you don't have any opposers. You have strong supporters, not, like Poland, like Balts, like ex-Soviet bloc countries, which have really experienced the Russian presence and are challenged with Russia's activities. Turkish support is also active there. So we have a group of strong supporters, and we have a group which does not think that we have to rush. So any kind of a new move in this direction should be and will be determined through a consensus. To tell you briefly, Georgia has done everything that was on its homework list in respect of reforms, in respect of any requirements that were given from NATO for the membership. So it's now the question is very much to the 29, with whom it's 29 already, yeah, it's 29, with whom we are working very actively to sort of build the acknowledgement of the momentum that the moves have to be done. But I mean, once again, I mean, it never happened without this capital being engaged, without a very clear and sort of clear energy vector that should be that was coming from United States. Look at any NATO expansion. I mean, as well as other cases that I mentioned. So, I mean, if we get that act which I'm talking about, I believe that will be an accelerator for EU, for NATO process.
I think a Georgia Support Act or something like it is a great idea in a way that we could continue to move forward. But looking back, it was mentioned by Dr. Holmes in his introductory remarks that this year marks the centenary of the first Georgian Republic. And what does this mean to the Georgian people today, marking this anniversary? And what lessons could there be looking back at the situation then, comparing it to the situation now?
Well, it's the lessons could be learned by all of us. I mean, it were interesting times. After the First World War, the Tsarist Empire collapsed. The Tsarist Empire that has taken Georgian statehood a century before that, a little bit more than a century before that, and so Georgia was left to the opportunity of once again recreating its statehood, because our statehood goes 2,300 years. So we did it many times through many invasions. So we were challenged once again to recreate had an opportunity to recreate our independence. And that's what we did. Created a republic. This was a first Georgian republic because it was kingdom all the time before. So, and made it in a very European sort of advanced way. The issues like no death penalty, issues like the equal suffrage for men and women, all those was in this constitution. But then the same happened. Russians rolled back with an emotion of recreating the empire with the new label, the Soviet Union. But look at the times. I mean, the period is 1821, and everyone was enthusiastic. Even Woodrow Wilson was enthusiastic about the Soviet Union, thinking that this is the new sort of a state that should be supported. But that happens in 19. In 21, they changed their identity and they form into the Soviet Union. This has happened once. No, then we go through the same story in the beginning of 90s. Collapse of Soviet Union. Once more, we are starting to recreate our state. Once more, we invest into our identity, into moving towards Europe. And once more, couple of years of sort of European development of the nation, and then Russia turns its history once more into their. It's difficult for me to say original, or maybe into the other side of the eagle, which is looking in the different direction. So basically, the history is repeated with the same motto: let's recreate empire.
That's absolutely right. I think we have a 21st century Russia with 19th century ambitions. and countries like Georgia stand in the way. And that's why it's important that the United States and NATO and our European partners stand in solidarity. We have time for a couple of questions.
Morten Tastum, Center for Transatlantic Relations. My question is concerning NATO and the disputed territories. Considering that Russia has military bases in the disputed territories, has begun demarcation and so on, what do you think the possibilities are for doing anything in relation to NATO, considering that they very likely won't do anything that would antagonize Russia before this situation has been resolved? Thank you.
Could you rephrase once again? So what do I think? The final part wasn't.
So considering the
military bases, yeah.
Do you think that NATO will take any steps towards including Georgia in any kind of way before this situation can be resolved?
Before the end of
question really to you.
Well, because this is DC and there's no shameless self-promotion, I just talk about this in this paper when you can get outside.
That's a really question to you. I believe that if there is a proper acknowledgement of the challenges just which I described, there are ways and means to make the moves to secure Georgia as an independent stronghold of NATO and the country that is really securing the NATO Eastern Front, securing EU processes, and as I told you, a solution for the Central Asia economies as well as for the states. Now, do I think will it be made? That's actually what I'm talking about. I mean, I'm talking about the bold moves that were made by the leaders that we applaud to. When Ronald Reagan said that you have to tear down that wall, it was not that popular in the United States. No one really paid much attention at that point to this historic comment, but later it was something that made the difference because it echoed very properly in the existing environment. So we need a bold move. And there have been moves done in a much more complicated situation like that. So we need to have bold moves, and we need to improvise, and we have to be realistic. So I say that if there is a real leadership, the move will be done.
And we need to start thinking outside of the box in the United States and in Europe on how to bring Georgia closer to NATO.
Basically, the question is: will it be a comfortable move? No, this will be a move out of the comfort zone. But you have to make moves out of the comfort zone to secure your stability in a challenging environment. That's like basics.
Mr. President, thanks very much for your introduction, and Luke, thanks for moderating. I'm Mykola Vorobyev, Ukrainian journalist, currently a research fellow at Johns Hopkins University. So, Mr. President, I have a question about the recent accident which happened in Ukraine like a few months ago when few Georgians were captured by Ukrainian Secret Service and forcefully kicked off from the country. And some of them there were fighters in eastern Ukraine. They came as volunteers to help Ukrainian army just to defend the country from the Russian invasion. So what's your position on this move from Ukrainian Secret Service and how you treat these mercenaries and fighters, Georgian fighters in eastern Ukraine? So what is their legal status in Georgia now? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry to tell you that I don't really recall the case, but I guess something has happened. But let me tell you that with Ukraine we are strategic partners, and we are basically in the same war, and plus that we demand the same in the same war, and we have the same adversaries is Russia. So we support Ukraine on every level. My policy is to push our joint agenda whenever I'm talking in DC or Brussels or in other capitals, I'm talking Georgia and I'm talking Ukraine and Moldova as well. Very much Ukraine, because Ukraine is under the war right now. So, taken several things into consideration. First is that I don't really comment on Ukraine's internal issues, internal affairs. That Ukraine is in war, and even if I wanted to comment, I think that I would refrain from all the comments. So that is the second issue. And plus, we are here in DC, where we want to push our joint agenda. I don't have a special stand on what you're saying. As for Georgians, Georgia and Georgians supporting Ukraine are fighting for the same values, for the same cause. We are united in this respect.
And thank you for your fascinating comments, Mr. President. Beata Martin-Rosa-Malowitz, the Director for Europe and Eurasia from the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. You mentioned the need for more robust democracy support from the U.S. side, and I wanted to ask you how important are credible elections in terms of this kind of assistance in the current situation?
They are just crucial. So they are crucial. I mean, elections is the basics of democracy. You can't have democracy without elections. So there we are.
Mr. President, I'm from Japan. My name is Masa Tanaka, NHK, Japan public broadcaster. And the ambassador is a very good friend of mine. And he's one of the most active diplomats.
This ambassador, I thought,
Yes. Yes.
I thought the Japanese ambassador was also a very good friend of mine.
Is he here right now?
No. Japan to Georgia, that's what I was meaning.
Mr. President, as you know, our country is also occupied by Russia, more than 70 years, northern territory. So what kind of message do you have? We, Japan, engage next 6 years Putin, Russia, in order to get back our territory to our country. Thank you.
Well, let me first of all tell you that we have great working relationships with Japan and with Prime Minister Abe. Whenever we met, we signed an agreement on our partnership, which laid the basic very close cooperation between two of our nations, which are very far. But Japan is rendering a great assistance to Georgia, helping it in developing its infrastructure, helping eventually, I hope, engaging more actively in investing in Georgia. We are trying to convince our Japanese friend to come and be more active in Georgia. Well, I believe that your standing dialogue with Russia on the islands is something that is a process of convincing Russia on solving the issue that they inherited, or they have created, and that there is a better way of communication and relationships between neighbors. We have the same message. What we are saying to Russia is, let's sit down at the table, acknowledge the fact that those occupied territories that they are having in Georgia are not adding anything to a Russian citizen, wherever that citizen is, in Moscow, in Petersburg, I don't know, in Ekaterinburg, wherever. Nothing is added on the table of Russian citizens because they have occupied Tskhinvali or occupied Crimea. So what we are saying is, let's think from the perspective of Russian citizens. I'm thinking from perspective of Georgian citizens, and how beneficiary our partnership would be, how much we would embrace and open opportunities for each other, unless there are just standing issues of occupying parts of your neighbors. And then goes the most funny thing, is that Russia does not need more square kilometers. The funny thing about this is that they take what they really don't need, because this is the biggest territorial country, biggest in the world, with demographic issues, with the issues that are linked and other issues. And they are longing for more territory which they cannot use. So I think that this rational discussion is why do you prefer occupying lands which you don't need to partnership from your neighbors and cooperation which will add to the tables of your citizens and to life conditions of your citizens. I believe eventually the truth that you should care about your people and that they would enjoy much more from Japan, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, you name it. And not only that, but also from our allies, which would fit into the picture and present more opportunities for Russia. I think that eventually we are nations that are, I mean, you are older than Georgians, but we are also pretty old. I mean, we've gone through lots of stuff. And we know that at some point this dialogue is going to happen. And I believe it will be a funny thing. Why did they occupy Tzkinwali? I mean, it's still strange for me. I mean, what was the point?
Well, that's a great message to end today's event on. I want to thank the president for coming here, taking time out of his very busy schedule to come to the Heritage Foundation. You're always welcome here. Georgians are always welcome here at the Heritage Foundation. And I wish you and your team a safe journey back to Tbilisi. So please join me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.